Well, somebody nobody knows is about to publish a book about something nobody's sure about. Hi, this is Scott Ott, and this is Bill Whittle now. And Bill, do you remember back in September of 2018 when the New York Times published a column by an alleged senior administration official in the Trump administration who claimed that there was a resistance movement within the Trump administration that was keeping the nation on course despite the president's chaotic and ridiculous kinds of actions, and if it weren't for them, that the country would be in much worse condition?
Yes, I do.
That anonymous op-ed author got a book deal. I'm not sure who they write the check to in that case, but in any case, so Hachette Books, I don't know how you pronounce it, Hachette or Hachette, Hachette Book Group is about to publish this coming month a book under this anonymous byline that is supposedly going to be an insider account of the Trump administration. That's not really the breaking news because all kinds of books come out like that. But what is interesting news right now is that the Justice Department has gone to the publisher and demanded proof of two things. Number one, that the author did not sign a non-disclosure agreement for working in the Trump administration. And number two, that the author had no access to classified information. Bill, why is it that the Trump administration insists on cracking down on free speech like this?
Well, obviously, Scott, you and your tremendously talented at playing these devil's advocate questions. Those are pretty weak ones if you really want to know. You do not have the right to publish classified information. That's why it's classified. We can agree that there are some forms of speech that should be limited. And if somebody comes up to Dwight Eisenhower on June 5th, 1944, and says, "When's the invasion?" If he decides not to say, that's not a violation of his freedom of speech. It's just common sense. So this obviously is not a free speech issue. But I'll tell you what is interesting about this, and that is that we have suddenly seen this reversal of the narrative, where formerly the CIA and the FBI and the National Security Agency, IRS, all of these things. Certainly the FBI was looking for communists, so needless to say the leftists were not too happy with that organization. But now they're being portrayed as the saviors of the republic. They're saving America from Donald Trump. They are saving the American people from a lunatic who, if only the American people knew how nuts he really was, then surely they would back them in their unconstitutional, undemocratic, un-American bid to determine the future of this country against the will of the American people.
Well, let me take issue with 2 points you raised there. Number one is that there's no indication from the publisher that the author of this book, the anonymous author, intends to release classified information in this document. Clearly, the Trump administration's Justice Department is engaging in a brushback pitch against this author. And number two, it is apparently fairly peculiar and perhaps even unique to the Trump administration that employees at the White House and elsewhere in the top levels of the administration have to sign non-disclosure agreements. That's kind of something Hollywood does, not Washington, D.C. does. Bill, doesn't it seem really that the Trump administration is just engaged in trying to shut this book down? They're not afraid he's going to leak classified info.
Well, we don't know that. How can we possibly know that? We already know that James Comey and John Brennan, the head of the CIA and the head of the FBI, have shown no reluctance whatsoever to leak information, including classified information, to the press in order to get their opinion of who should be president to become law. So if the top officials at the agencies are at the point where they can just, without any regard at all for the consequences, basically leak information, sensitive information, classified information in order to gain some political leverage. If the top people at the FBI and the CIA are doing this, I don't think it's unreasonable at all to wonder if this person who is claiming to be an insider is in fact an insider who's going to basically use classified information to further his political agenda. If Comey and Brennan are doing this with impunity, and I like to think that there will be a day when the impunity will not be so much then that's fine. But right now, after watching Hillary Clinton be indicted for 45 minutes and then basically set free, and Comey set free, and Brennan set free, and all the rest of these people who've broken many, many, many felonies in broad daylight in front of everybody, I don't find it unreasonable at all, number one, for the investigation to see if there's classified information. And I certainly don't think it's unreasonable for the non-disclosure agreements. Look,
well, what they're really trying to do here, Bill, is get the guy's name because they basically said, look, if you can't prove to us, if you can't provide documentation proving that this guy was not required to sign a non-disclosure agreement and that he did not have access to classified information, then you need to give us the time periods where he worked and when he worked there. So they're really trying to zoom in so that they can get his name. So then, of course, the Trump administration can discredit Anonymous before the book even comes out.
Well, I don't think the Trump administration is going to have much discrediting to do, because if we're going to judge by the charges that have been leveled against Trump so far, starting with the Russian collusion case, and then just through this latest little mini tempest in a teapot that pretty much evaporated once we realized that the public servant who has been a long member of the American patriotic intelligence community can no longer stand. Turns out the guy was a Democratic operative. Turns out he was working for Comey. He was working for fine.
Well, so you're making my point, because basically they're trying to unearth the mole. They're trying to unmask the anonymous whistleblower in that case, and in this case as well, this resistance leader, so-called. And really, they just want to do what you just did, which is tear that person down personally so that you can discredit everything that he might say in this book, even things that might be true.
And if I had been slandered the way that Donald Trump had been slandered, and not only personally slandered, put that aside for a minute. If unsubstantiated personal attacks on me utterly prevented me from doing my job, and I had an opportunity to find out that another one of these things was coming, I would want to know what was in that book coming. I would absolutely want to know. Now, the question is he using the law? Is he using the Department of Justice in an illegal fashion? And if the answer is no, if the answer is just a little unseemly... You mean, is
President Trump using the Justice Department?
Correct. If President Trump is using the Justice Department to gain information on this upcoming book in an extrajudicial fashion, then that is something that concerns me deeply.
Well, and that would be one thing. And this is I'm glad you said that, because that segues to the heart of the matter here, which is the question of who ordered this investigation. The Justice Department is maintaining that they do these kinds of things as a normal course of action anytime somebody who worked within the top levels of the federal government is going to publish a book. Nevertheless, last year, after this column was published in the New York Times by this anonymous writer, President Trump referred to it as treason, and he said he wanted the Justice Department to investigate. Now, we're in another one of these situations where the president doesn't necessarily have to send a telegram by Western Union over to the Justice Department to say, do this probe. But it was clear that the President of the United States wanted his Justice Department to do this probe. Is there any problem with that?
Well, you started your question here by saying that this has been done repeatedly in the past by the Justice Department when dealing with high-level officials who might have access to classified information.
That's what the Justice Department is claiming. The Justice Department says this is just an ordinary kind of thing to do. Now,
is there any evidence that they are lying about that?
That I can't tell you, because I don't have they haven't launched an investigation into the Justice Department's use of this. Here we are once again trying to pin this kind of badge of paranoia and tyranny on a president who, by your own admission, or at least by the admission of the Justice Department, says that this is more or less a routine thing that we do. But it's not being treated as a routine thing because it's done by Donald Trump. Therefore, it must be some sort of tyrannical sort of suppression of free speech. It's not just because it's being done by Donald Trump, Bill. It's because President Trump called this column treason and said that the Justice Department should launch an investigation. It's not just him.
Let me tell you something, Scott. If people in the intelligence community, up to and including the directors of those agencies, people who have access to information on ordinary citizens that ordinary citizens are not allowed to have. If it turns out, and it seems to me to be so blatantly obvious that there's not really up for much discussion anymore, but if it turns out that a group of people in Washington decided that they didn't like the outcome of an election, didn't think it was good for America, and we're going to use the levers of government to reverse that direction by finding any means possible to impeach the president who'd been elected by the people of the United States, well, I don't know what else to call it but treason. It is treason. It's high treason. And it is absolutely the worst kind of treason. It's this kind of high-minded, nose in the air, I'm more patriotic than you kind of treason. If you are working for a government agency, if you are a flag-level officer in the United States military, and you are not comfortable with the results of an election, and you decide you're going to use your rank and leverage to do something about it, you're in the wrong country. You are in the wrong country and you are wearing the wrong uniform. And I'd like you to be stripped of that uniform, and I'd like it to happen publicly. So to say that, my God, it's a suppression of speech because it's treason, because it is treason. If a guy is coming forward and say, listen, I worked in the intelligence community, and here's why we in the deep state are doing what we're doing in order to overturn the 2016 election. If somebody's writing a book that's even close to that, that is an admission of treason. It's an admission to an absolute violation of their oaths of office and to a complete invalidation of the entire American system, all of it. So yes, it's treason. Of course it's treason. And once again, we have the only politician, it seems, in the country who's willing to actually use the adjective that applies in the case.
Well, the book publisher is refusing to give any information at this point, and so it's unclear, at least as we record this, where the Justice Department goes next on this. The book is scheduled for release later this month, and I guess we'll find out if the so-called anonymous resistance leader from inside the administration actually had access to any kind of information.
Can I add one thing to this?
Yes, please do.
I just want to be clear. I want to be clear about the fact that this is not a position I'm taking because of the weather, okay? If it turned out that the allegations that had been leveled against Trump had substance, if it had turned out, for example, that this latest whistleblower, the one that they used to jump on their impeachment proceedings, if it turned out that was in fact a 65-year-old veteran of the intelligence service who had no political connections, had no axe to grind, all of this stuff, the deep state would still be wrong and treasonous, but I'd lend the whole thing a little more credence. The fact of it is that the reason I'm so vociferously defending the president on this is because this is not a legal, rational, non-political look into the kind of things that people should be looking into. We need to be looking at our government all the time and never trust them no matter who's president.
And Bill, let me just push back a little bit on that assertion, though, because
sure.
And I'll just take it to the extreme and say this guy could have, either this anonymous columnist from the New York Times or the so-called whistleblower in the Trump-Ukraine phone call situation, both of these people could be lifelong Democrats who hate Donald Trump and are intensely political, but they could be telling the truth. So I guess what I'm asking is, if this book comes out, do we have to dismiss it out of hand because the guy's not willing to identify himself and therefore he must be some sort of Democratic operative? Or should we read it and analyze it based on what it brings forward, not on what we think of the tactics of the guy who wrote it?
How long have you been fondling little boys? I think that question deserves an answer, don't you?
I don't think that's the same
it's exactly
approach.
It's exactly
what I'm
the same
saying
thing.
is
it's exactly the same thing.
Bill,
no, hold on. If you've got a guy who's claiming I am a relatively highly placed government official, and here's the story of the resistance, you had better come up with some evidence of Donald Trump's criminal culpability. And I mean evidence. I don't mean hearsay. I don't mean stories. I mean actual evidence that could survive an analysis in court. Because if you're saying we have to take this book seriously because it's an allegation against the president, we should look into allegations.
I'm not saying we have to take this book.
I want to know how long you've been fondling kids.
I'm not saying we have to take this book seriously, Bill. I'm saying, do we have to dismiss it out of hand because we don't like the approach that the guy took to doing this? Because frankly, most people who have served in government would say, look, if you serve at the pleasure of the president, if you don't agree with the president, your obligation is to resign.
Right.
And this guy didn't do that.
Yeah, I'll tell you why I think we dismiss it out of hand. I'll tell you why. Because after having watched 3 years of not only a witch hunt, but a coup d'etat, where every single pebble in the country has been overturned, looking for fingerprints that Donald Trump may have visited the state at some point. After all of this, somebody's suddenly coming out of the rafters with these kind of actionable kind of revelations about Donald Trump and the way he runs the White House. This is all of a sudden kind of happening. Of course, I dismiss it out of hand. I dismiss it out of hand for the reason that I explained just a few minutes ago. I dismiss it out of hand because all of the other allegations have proven to be weaker and weaker and weaker. And what I learned from the Brett Kavanaugh hearings is that these people will stoop to. There are no levels that they will not stoop to. They will go into the gutter. And when they get to the bottom of the gutter, they're going to keep digging. They don't care about anything. They're just throwing as much mud as they possibly can and hoping it'll stick. And my position on this is, hey, if you've got something that is of legitimate concern to the Republic, I have a funny feeling that given the fact that the Democratic Party has done nothing except try and impeach Donald Trump since the morning of the Wednesday in November of 2016, then yes, of course I dismiss it out of hand. And I can have my mind changed, but my mind would have to be changed by some kind of really, really solid evidence. And if you've got that kind of solid evidence, you don't go and publish a book. You go to New York Times or you go to the Washington Post, some other form of biased journalism. But you don't, if you've got the kind of evidence, look, Woodward and Bernstein didn't bring down Richard Nixon by publishing a novel called All the President's Men. The way they got Nixon out of office was to basically just produce enough actual evidence for the president to realize that he was going to have to resign. So I don't know what you're saying other than to say,
of course. People in his own party came to him and told him that his goose was cooked. And that so far has not happened in this situation with President Trump. If anything, people in President Trump's own party have doubled down on their support for him, at least publicly. We've not seen that kind of behavior. And so there's no indication of that going forward. Well, the members at BillWhittle.com have proven time and again that they are not afraid of the tough questions. They're willing to fund a program like this where we intentionally ask the provocative questions from the perspective of our ideological rivals, so that we don't just sit around talking to ourselves like boys in a plastic bubble and patting ourselves on the back because we've set up the straw men and knocked them down and felt like such a good boy.
And we're giving you defense in depth too. You know, when you go up against liberals in a water cooler argument and you say something that you think is true and they come back with some kind of a skeevy sort of response that's changing the subject or moving the goalposts, and they got that all rehearsed. Our ability to constantly keep things back on the issue, keep them on track, and to defeat the argument to its death is, I think, very, very important.
And the reason we do it this way specifically by I am ambushing Bill Whittle with these questions is because that's what happens to you. You don't get the luxury that most people on TV get where they, have somebody write the whole show for them and they're completely briefed and prepped beforehand and it's all scripted out. No, you've got to answer questions when people walk up to you in the workplace or somewhere in public or standing by the side of a soccer field and say, hey, what do you think of your boy Trump did this time? You've got to be able to handle those questions. And so we're grateful to the members of BillWhittle.com who have made it possible for us to conduct this kind of dialogue and, frankly, to get a wider hearing for our views because we are willing to face the tough questions. If you're not yet a member at BillWhittle.com, we invite you to become so by going to BillWhittle.com and clicking that Become a Member link. By the way, we've got audio versions of all new episodes of Bill Whittle now, as well as Right Angle and the entire archive of those programs. You can find them on your favorite podcast app. And if you want links to that, just go to BillWhittle.com and click the podcast link. For Bill Whittle, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks for watching.